Welcome everybody. Welcome to session 10 of the Cert 3 in Government. Well, this is a little bit extraordinary. I don't think any of us would have predicted this last time we got together. I hope you're all safe and I hope you're keeping well. I hope you're keeping indoors as much as possible. So what we're going to try and do here is I'm going to try and go through the content as I normally would in the workshop, go through the activities, try and explain those activities as we work through, just so that I can clarify any areas of confusion. And then you guys need to write the responses as you normally would and submit that work through to me. And there's a couple of options that we can do that. We can do that either via email, where you can scan it and email it directly through to me, or you could do the old traditional way and pop it in an envelope and send it through to the office. You won't be able to drop it off at the office because, like many other businesses, everybody's working remotely at the time. So I'll go through those options at the end of this video anyway, just to recap. But that's the plan. So let's see how we go. The unit for today, or this unit, is BSBFLM303, Contribute to Effective Workplace Relationships. And thank goodness this has occurred at this time in the program, because there's a little bit of overlap between the units. So I'll try and be, just given that we're in this unusual circumstance, I'll try and be as efficient as I can with a lot of the activities. So traditionally, where I would in the workshop just get you to cover off some content that we've previously done, just for good measure. I think it's probably prudent of me not to do that in these circumstances. So wherever possible, if we've done it before, I'll say, look, don't worry about doing that because we've already done that. If it's something new, we'll work through it. So let's get into it, because I don't want this video to be too long. All right, so this unit has 4 outcomes. All around the topic of effective team relationships, or team workplace relationships. And we've talked about a lot of these ideas and characteristics throughout the program, but this unit just brings them all together. So there's 4 key areas: seek, receive, communicate information and ideas. And we've already talked about information. We're just going to bring that into a team-based workplace context. Encourage trust and confidence, which is something that we've touched on through the program but haven't looked at individually. So we're going to just pluck that out and sort of break that down a little bit today. Identify and use networks and relationships. Now, networking is probably not something that we do much in a formal aspect, but it's no doubt something that many of you guys are doing on a regular basis. So I'm just going to break that down, talk about what a contemporary description of a network is, and then how it can help us in our role. And then contribute to positive outcomes. Now that bit's all around conflict management, and we did a whole unit on that last session, so that we don't have to really unpack that too much. Why is seeking, receiving, and communicating information and ideas important to our team's effectiveness? Well, we've already talked about this quite a bit, and I'll just recap on it. Information is the blood that works through teams. If the information doesn't flow through our work teams, just like our body, if the blood doesn't flow through, it rots and it eventually gets smelly and drops off. And teams are pretty much the same. If information doesn't flow through teams, you're pretty much just going to kill the team off. You think about that, like in the body, if one of our limbs doesn't receive blood, it no longer stops functioning as it should. If you think about our teams, if any particular individual is kept out of the loop, it's very difficult for them to perform up to their requirements. So information is critical, and as we've talked about previously, it's also can be used both as a positive in things such as keeping people in the loop, sharing ideas, sharing information in which people can make decisions. It can also be used as a negative lever, and that is in terms of power plays. So sometimes we keep information from people if we don't particularly like them, or we want them to sort of struggle with whatever it is that they're doing. We might have the info that can unlock the struggles, but we often may not, if we don't like them, pass that on. So it can be either a positive thing or a negative thing. Hopefully we're using it in a positive, and we're dealing with those negatives so that it doesn't get to that. So information, seeking, receiving, and communicating information helps us to determine our work responsibilities, priorities, and protocols, so that we know what we have to do, why we're doing it, and how we're supposed to be doing it. It helps us to let others know about challenges and successes and any support requirements, so we can let people know if there's any opportunities, or if there's any potholes in the road, or if there's any support that we can provide. Information, particularly communicated information, is critical in terms of sharing and developing new ideas and approaches to our work. And it's, as we talked about last session, it's critical to conflict resolution. Just to recap back on a couple of sessions ago when we did the information unit, good information is information that's valid, comes from a valid source, not from some Tony Pan's blog on the Webiverse somewhere, but it comes from a good, reliable source, such as an industry body, a government, or an academic institution that know what they're talking about. It's reliable, it's consistent with other sources, and we talked about this idea of triangulation. When we look for consistency, we normally look for at least 3 reputable sources that are pretty much dancing to the same beat. We look for accuracy, that is that it's correct and it's honest. So remember, we talked about the fact that information can be correct, but if you retain information, like if you don't share all the information and you retain some of it to yourself without sharing it, it might be correct, but it might be misleading. So it's saying that that alcohol is good for you because it relaxes is pretty bloody good statement, but it's probably not fully transparent about the other side effects that can potentially come from it. It has to be up to date, and that will depend on the information and the context of that information. But if we talk about workplace, it has to be something that's fairly recent. So for activity 1, if you pull out your workbook at activity 1, what information do you require to be able to perform your work responsibilities? Where can you or do you collect information associated with your work responsibilities, and what considerations do you need to take when sourcing information that you require to perform your work responsibilities? I think we can give this one a miss. So let's skip on activity 1, and I'll just get you to write on activity 1 as per previous unit. And we've completed this quite a bit, and I'll cross-reference that when I get your assessments. So information sources, and again we talked about this previously, but this is pretty important just to recap back on it. Information can come from internal, that is from policies, procedures, supervisors, colleagues, and the like, or it can be external. It can come from outside of our 4 walls, and that's things like customers or members of the public can tell us information. We can Google stuff, or we can look at the legislation.gov.au website if we're looking for laws and acts. And of course, there are always professional industry bodies out there to make money with information. So there's always some industry group or professional group that can offer us information, and that's another example of an external source. So let's have a look at activity 2, and I'm going to bring this up. Let's see if I can do this without breaking the system. There we go. Yeah, like a pro. Activity. If we look at activity 2, in the table below, identify any internal or external sources of information that can assist you in refining ideas and approaches so that you are consistent and compliant with policies and procedures. And really what that question's asking is, what sources of information can you use that can ensure that you're on the right track? So, how do you know whether you're doing your work, you're performing your tasks and your duties in a way that's compliant with your legislative requirements, that's compliant with your organizational requirements and your management requirements? Well, what are some of the internal ones? And I talked about some with internal things such as policies and procedures are great internal sources. Managers are internal sources. Senior, people in senior roles wouldn't necessarily ask the folk that just started yesterday. But if you've got someone who's respected and knowledgeable and in a senior role, definitely. They're all examples of internal sources, and I'm sure you guys can think of many others. Examples of external sources, and I said a couple, websites such as the legislative website, legislation.gov.au. Other external sources can include industry bodies, and you guys would know what your industry bodies are. So if you're if you're in a role as an arborist, no doubt that there are specific industry professionals or bodies around that. If you're in a role as in a HR or admin type role, there are definitely heaps of HR type professional bodies out there. Can also extend to other professional bodies such as unions, health and safety bodies, and so forth. They're all really good examples of external sources of information. So that's activity 2. Let's see if I can get back to the slideshow. Oh yeah. All right. So we now want to talk about just bring back this idea of we've got information that is the lifeblood of our teams, but then how do we make that information flow? And we've talked about this in the communication unit, but again, just to recap, if we look at the simple communication model such as this slide, you've got two people, you've got a message that each of those individuals have, and that message might be, I want to say something to you. You will then interpret what I've just said, you will make meaning out of that, and then you'll respond and bounce it back, and this goes on for as long as it needs to. And of course, we've got all these other in that message, we've got both the verbal, which are the words that I use, and the tone and the level of my voice and so forth, but also the non-verbal, and that can be things like my facial expressions, whether I'm frowning or smiling whilst I'm saying that, my body language, whether I'm in an open or closed posture, or shaking my fists or what have you, or pointing, which can be really aggressive as well. And also, and it can also be symbols such as, for example, the clothes that I wear, or whether I've got like a doctor's gown on, you'll interpret that as part of the message. So if I've got a doctor's gown on and I've got my doctor's clipboard and I tell you give you some medical information, you're more likely to believe that than if I'm got my my 1 week shadow and I'm just wearing my stubbies and singlet from the weekend and my thongs on, which you'll probably then go, what the hell is this guy talking about? So we've got that in the basic model of communication. But also just the graphic on the bottom of that is just to take into consideration as well, back to our diversity unit, that teams are made up of very diverse individuals. And whether that's diversity in terms of cultural diversity, whether it's diversity in terms of gender, age, just also work approach, the way that we like to receive information. So some people like to receive information in verbal form, other people like to have it written, and so forth and so forth. Just this notion that very rarely are two people the same, that most of us have some type of difference. And what does that difference mean? Well, it doesn't really mean anything if we're aware of it and we can use it to our advantage, and we can be inclusive in the way that we operate. So, and we talked about the benefits of that in the diversity unit. I don't want to recap on that, but just to sort of bring it back into this idea of communication and thinking about diversity when we communicate, so that we communicate in a way that is inclusive, not in a way that keeps people out. So let's go to activity 3. And again, these are not new ideas. These are old ideas, and we've covered this off in other units. So I'm not going to necessarily, I'm not going to ask you to do this activity. So like activity 1, activity 3, I'll get you just to write in your workbook as per diversity unit. We've covered this extensively in there, but I just wanted to stress that point again in terms of this unit, is the importance of us thinking about and taking into consideration the importance of diversity in our communication if we're going to be working effectively within teams. The other thing I want to talk about in relation to working effectively within teams is going back to what we talked about last session. So last session in the conflict unit, we talked about collaboration, and collaboration, if you recall, was the end game. That was what we were striving for, and collaboration is an outcome that you get what you want, that I get what I want, and hopefully the organization gets what they want, and we characterize that by saying, win-win outcomes or win-win-win. So in an idea where you and I are working together, that neither of us feel like there's a power imbalance in the way that we're working, that we both feel that we're working together. And that doesn't mean that one of us can't play a leadership role and be more instructional than the other, but it just means that we're respectful of each other's roles and responsibilities, and we feel that we're engaged and we're part of the decision-making process, not that we feel where there's a power imbalance. And that's generally where I feel I have got something to contribute, but I'm not being asked to contribute that. So it's like this Venn diagram in this picture, and a Venn diagram is, if you're probably like me and you still have nightmares at school where we did Venn diagrams, so where you have all these circles and there's a common area in the middle, and in this case it's this us. So you have ideas, I have ideas, and we're often trying to find this middle ground where we can connect and we share ideas, and that's where we work from. That's the good point. And there are lots of work being done around the principles of consultation in particular, and there's some great tools out there. If just looking at this one briefly, under the principles, so good consultation in particular and collaboration require the principles of participation and leadership. And just the type of things I talked about, that people feel like they're equal. That doesn't mean that everybody has the same level of responsibility. We know that in teams, different people have different responsibilities. So if you're in a senior role, you carry the burden of decision making around a particular scope that maybe others in the team don't. That doesn't mean that you still don't treat other people as equals within your team. You should be treating everybody as equals, and that's part of your RED framework. And that means things such as just taking into consideration their thoughts and opinions, asking for input where it's appropriate, being consultative and so forth. Development of goals is really critical. So as part of that consultation and collaboration, there's that sense of agreeance in what we're doing together. And we've done this in a number of activities through the workshop, especially where group activities will say, get together as a group, come up with an agreed strategy. And that's really important, so people have buy-in and ownership into what we're doing. Once you come up with those agreed goals, then everybody is communicated, or everybody understands where we're going, so what's the end point and how we're getting there. So what steps are we taking, who's responsible for what timelines do we need to meet, and so forth. And embedded with all this is what I just talked about, that people feel like they're part of the decision-making process. That feeds into the ownership, and of course that we're managing conflict. And of course, going back to my point from the last session, conflict is not a bad thing, and it's not something that we want to avoid, because we do want people to challenge ideas, and that's good for teams, but it needs to be done in a respectful way, so that challenge of ideas are seen as constructive, not destructive. And then this takes us into activity 4, and I'm going to bring up this activity again so I can talk through it. Activity 4. Your team is having difficulties in achieving a quality outcome for a key task that your team is responsible for delivering. You're consistently getting poor feedback from your end users about the quality of the work. You've approached your manager about it, and they have asked you to take a leadership role with the problem. They want to see you raise the issue with the team and come up with a strategy to fix it. Your manager has stressed that you approach it in a consultative manner, not an authoritative manner. How will you undertake a consultative approach? So have a think about that. So how will you how would you take an approach that is engaging and brings everybody into the discussion? So normally, when we talk about consultative approaches, in a non-authoritative type of approach, we would talk about going to people with stating what the issue is. We've got this challenge. This is what we need to do in terms of the endpoint. What are your thoughts? What do you think? Do you have any ideas? Do you have any preferences or anything that you'd like to contribute to it? And that might be, as a manager or a leader, you might walk around and talk to people individually. You might get a team meeting, like maybe a bit of a stand-up or a toolbox meeting to discuss it. Or you might, if it's something really important, you might set it aside as a standalone meeting. Say, we want to talk about this one thing. So, for example, the situation we're in at the moment, no doubt you probably all have had COVID-19 specific type meetings where you just where that's the problem and you need to address it, and hopefully you've been to a degree consulted in how it's going to be managed. So that's at 4.1. 4.2, how will you communicate the outcome of the consultation to the work team? And there's a number of things that we should consider around communication. And if I go back to that diversity point, not everybody receives information the same way. So sending out an email to everybody will exclude some people, but it means that but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do that. You can send out an email, but you should also support it with other stuff. So if you send out an email, you might not catch everybody. If you tell people, they might hear it, but they might not necessarily retain it or remember it. So I might tell someone, and then I might follow up with an email. I can also put up signs, and that will remind people. So I might tell people, I might put up some signage, I might send out an email. So when you think about that, think about more of a strategic or strategy rather than a single. So not just one, but think about maybe there's a couple of multiple ways that I can do that. And 4.3, how will you deal with the issues remaining unresolved from the consultation process? So let's say you call a team meeting and it's quite a robust discussion. A number of people have some strong ideas. Maybe not all those ideas are accepted by the group, but you don't want to sit there wasting the whole day. I shouldn't say wasting, but let's just say chewing up the whole day working through it. So so you wrap up the meeting or the discussion, and then you're going to go and tie up those loose ends. So how would you go around dealing with some of those unresolved issues? If it was me, I'd probably, depending on the nature of the individual and the context of it, but just do a bit of a follow-up one-on-one with people, have a chat to them if there are serious ongoing issues, and start getting into my conflict management approaches or strategies that we talked about in the last session, that hopefully you're thinking about, like things like 7-step problem solving, determining needs, and so forth. Let's get back to the presentation. Nice. So hopefully that's all good so far. So I want to talk a little bit about trust now, because trust we've touched on indirectly through the program, but I really want to talk about it directly now. Trust is an interesting element. It's one of those things that it's very difficult to put your finger on it. You just know whether you trust someone or not. But we can sort of break that down a little bit. We can do a bit of a thought experiment and go, okay, what's the difference between one person that I trust and another person that I don't? So if I were to ask you, and let's just say I were to say to you, okay, we're going to drive from point A to point B. I'm happy to drive. I'll say to you, I'm a pretty good driver. Trust me, I'll take that road. There's a few things that'll go through your mind that we can pretty much uh, um, work through just by thinking about it. Number one is that you will think about, if before you say, can I trust Tony? So what type of driver is Tony? Is he safe? Can I trust him before I jump in the car? There's a couple of things that you ask yourself. You ask yourself, is Tony competent? So can he do it? So that's not a question necessarily about whether I'm a nice guy or about my characteristics, personal characteristics, but mainly, can I drive a car? Or maybe I can drive a car, but am I sober to drive that car? So there's a number of elements that you would think about my competency. So we can think about that. We can translate that into the workplace. When someone, or you ask somebody to trust you, or someone asks you to trust them, one of the key elements that they'll be asking themselves, or you'll be asking yourself if you're being asked to trust somebody else, is, what is this person's level of competency? So if I say to you, yeah, leave that task with me, I'll do it for you. You go home early or whatever you have to do. Trust me, I'm okay with it. One of the first things you'll think about is like, is Tony actually competent? Can he do it? And if the answer is yes, then you'll go on to the next thing. If the answer is no, you'll go, that's all right, Tony, I can do that. So let's just say, let's continue on with our thought experiment. And yeah, I've said, look, I can drive, and you know that I'm actually got a pretty good reputation as being a good driver. A bit slow, but I get there safely. And you look at me, and I look like I've got all my senses with me. I'm sober, and I'm not drunk, and I'm right to drive. The next thing that you will ask yourself is, do I have your interests, your best interests in mind? So, am I open and transparent, and do I actually have your best interests in mind? So I can be competent, but if you think that I'm shady, that is, I'm not necessarily got your best interests in mind. I got my best interests or someone else's best interest in mind. Let's say, I've got the interests of some other party, and that might be in a workplace. We can talk about things like, you might not trust me because you think that I'm too close to management, or you might not trust me because I'm with another group that themselves aren't, that's a pretty shady group. If you think that I don't have your best interest in mind, it's very difficult to trust. So if you're in a leadership role, this is one of the key challenges that you have, especially for people who transition. So you're in a team, you're part of a team, and you've been tapped on the shoulder and asked if you'd like to take a leadership role, and you accept it and you step up. One of the things that changes the dynamic of the team is that the team then starts to ask whether you've still got the team's interests in mind, or whether now you're looking out for management. And this is this idea about transparency, openness, and whose interests you have in mind. So we need to think about that, especially when we think about ourselves and building trust with other people. As your trainer and facilitator, do you believe that I have your best interests in mind, or do you believe, in terms of helping you get through this program, or do you think that I'm trying to trip you up and catch you out and, trying to set up traps so that you make a mistake? And those type of things will lead to whether you feel you can trust me. And if we think about those elements such as competency and whether I've got your best interests in mind, you then start to think about some other things. So you start to think about past history. So we make predictions about the future based on our past behaviors. So if I say to you, we start the workshops. Let's say that we get the go ahead to continue on with the workshops, and I say, yeah, let's start at 7 o'clock, and you're trying to determine whether I'm going to be there on time or not. One of the things that you'll do is you'll think about any past experience. So we're at workshop 10. We've had 9 workshops before now, and you'll say to yourself, has Tony been on time every other or any? How often has Tony been on time the 9 previous times? And if if the answer to that is every time, well, then you're going to be pretty confident that the next time I'm going to be on time. And this is the idea of we base predictions about the future based on past experience. So questions about my competency, questions about my my intentions in terms of having your best interest in mind are all driven by this idea of reliability. How reliable and consistent is my behavior? And that is based on your predictability. So if you think I'm reliable in terms of my competency and my trustworthy in terms of my openness and transparency, and you've been and I'm reliable because of my past experience, you will feel confident that you can predict that in the future I will be. So from that, just from that thought experiment, breaking that down, we can reflect back upon ourselves and go, if I want people to trust me, what do I need to do? Well, there's a couple of things. One, I need to know my job. If I don't know my job and I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, people can potentially still like me and go, hey, that Tony's, he's a good guy. But they'll find it very difficult to trust me. They'll say he's a good guy, but he's pretty incompetent, like Gomer Pyle, for those of you of my vintage. If you think, look, Tony is he's reliable, he's predictable, he's got our best interests in mind, and he is consistent, that is, he always behaves in a particular way, then that will give you the confidence to be able to predict in the future. So you'll look at, so if I think about myself and say, how do I build trust with other people? I want people to trust me, then I've got to behave in a way that is consistent, that people can predict my future behavior. I know that Tony, when Tony comes to these workshops, he's regularly on time. And if he doesn't, there's a bloody good reason for it. If he's not on time, it's not because he's incompetent or he's irregular, but it must be because of an act of God, such as, cars broke down or there's been some type of obstruction on the road or whatever the case may be. And I'm accountable for that. I take responsibility. I don't pass it on to somebody else and say, oh, it wasn't my fault, somebody else's, but I'm accountable for those actions. So that requires this consistency of behavior. And this is why organizations have things like codes of conduct in place or rules. And that's so that if people can behave in a consistent manner, we can start to trust ourselves. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to, and I keep saying this through the program, it doesn't mean that we have to, have an incredibly personal, strong relationship with our colleagues. But if we don't trust them, it's very difficult for us to have a very effective team. Whether it's in the workplace or in a sporting arena, one of the critical elements for us to be able to work well together is to know that I have to know that you've got my back and you have to know that I have your back. And if we don't, we're going to be undermining each other. We're going to be second guessing. We're going to be, hedging our bets, so to speak. And that's all those things are not only toxic and destructive, but they're also highly ineffective. If I'm constantly watching my back, I'm not watching where I'm going, and that just means I go a lot slower and tend to make a lot more mistakes. So if we think about that in terms of ourselves and how we can generate trust amongst our team and colleagues, just think about this idea of being open and transparent, that people think that we've got their best interests and believe that we've got their best interests in mind. Being competent at what we're doing and acting in a way that's consistent so that people can predict. Doesn't mean that we have to be boring, but it just means that people go, yeah, I know that Tony will assess this work in the same consistent way he assesses it all the way. So it's not like one session he thinks, yeah, that's good because he's in a good mood. Next session he sends it all back and says that's not good enough because he's cranky because his sporting team has lost or whatever the case may be. Let's have a look at activity 5. Describe the behaviors that demonstrate the following: integrity, respect, empathy. These are all tied into the notion of a trustworthy team. We've already covered this previously, but I'll just get you to do this activity, please. Just write down a few of those behaviors that demonstrate those. So if I talk about this trust is made up of having that integrity, having competence in what we're doing, being consistent in the way that we behave, being loyal to show loyalty to those who we're asking to trust us. And part of that is, as I said, making sure that we're open and transparent in the way that we're behaving. And within that, I talked about predictability, making sure that we're reliable and taking accountability. So when things go wrong, that we don't blame other people for it. It's either gone wrong because there's an act of God, or if it's because of something that we've done, we say, "Yep, yeah, I screwed that up, but this is what I've learnt from it, and this is what I'm going to do different next time, so it doesn't happen again." And all these things together build trust, and they build trust within individuals, or you can build trust through in teams. Things such as practicing openness, giving as much warning of issues coming up as possible, being fair in the way that you deal with people, wherever possible, telling the truth, being flexible, and responsive to other people's needs. If you make promises, whether there's some promises are spoken and some promises are non-spoken. An example of that is you go to McDonald's. McDonald's don't say we're going to have your food ready for you in X amount of seconds, but just by nature, it's an unwritten promise that they're fast food, so the food better be fast. You're not going there to sit with a conversation with someone while they get your meal ready. So don't, if you really want to be trusted, don't just say, I didn't promise I would do that. It's the intent. And remember that we always judge other people by their actions, and we judge ourselves by our intentions. So I may have intended to tell you the truth and I just didn't. You're not going to care about that. You're going to care about whether I have delivered on my promise or not. You're judging me by my actions, not by my intentions. And we all do that. So none of us are, I'm not saying none of us, but most of us aren't exempt from that. Demonstrate competence in your role and duties. Strive to be consistent in your behaviors and your actions. And of course, maintain confidence. If someone tells you something and they don't want you to share it, don't be a dill and do that. So in this one here, activity 6, in groups on a flip chart, list behaviors that promote trust in effective workplace relations and behaviors that hinder effective workplace relationships. Come up with examples where you've demonstrated these. The activity says do them in groups on a flip chart, but can I just get you to pop it into your workbook, please? And you can just work individually at that. I'm happy. I'm not really sure what the format, whether you're all still at work or at home. If you're still communicating with others, I'm happy for you to work with others, and whether it's via phone or email, and say, hey, do you want to work on activity 6 together? I'm happy for you guys to do all that. If not, just pop it on there. If you're working on a computer on this, for example, you don't have to necessarily do this workbook. I should have said at the start. If you just want to just type it onto a Word document, I'm happy to accept that. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the workbook. As long as I'm just get the answers for the activities, I'm happy. If you're working in the workbook, I'm just having a look at the workbook now, and there's no gap in the workbook for you to write these down. So you can either write them in the margins, which is not going to look too great, or just pick any of the pages where there is some space and just write on there activity 6, and you can just add your responses to that. So maybe in one of the other activities that I said not to worry about doing. And once you've done that one, we'll skip straight on to activity 7. Now in activity 7, I've got a scenario here, and just get you to think about how she can deal with it. So a role model in a negative environment. Laura looked out of the window of the office. She had been looking forward to her new job as the supervisor of the depot since she was informed of her successful application for the position. I might get this up actually whilst I'm reading it. She had to leave her old depot and team at the other side of the city to take up the position, but she felt she was up for the challenge of leading a new team. Laura had spent the first 3 hours going through the depot's induction program, learning about the depot's directions and strategies, the structure and key people at the site, and of course reading through procedure and policy statements. Laura also spent time reading through the depot's own code of behaviours, which was designed to complement the organisation's values and code of conduct. She was so impressed by what she read. The behaviours focused on around the following: to foster teamwork, to encourage personal development, to encourage innovation, to always have open and honest communication, to empower team members at all levels of the organisation, to treat all team members with respect. Whilst sitting at her desk, considering how she would spend her first week in the role, she overheard a conversation occurring between her immediate manager and one of Laura's team members. "I don't care if you think your way is better. I'm the boss and you will do as I say." Uncomfortable with the conversation, Laura went for a walk around the depot. As she was waiting for the gates to open into the workshop area, she heard a staff member talking to another staff member. "I went and told the manager about how stressed we are with all the extra job requests coming in. I figured if they promote open and honest communication, I should say something rather than complain about it. Well, never again. They told me that if I couldn't handle the work, I should find another job and they will get someone who can handle the work." Beginning to be really concerned by all that she had heard, Laura decided to head back towards her manager's office. As Laura entered the office, her manager rose out of their chair, smiled and said, "You seem to be settling in well, but I'll tell you the first rule of management around here. Don't trust anyone. Live by that and you'll be fine." Laura wants to build trust between herself and her team and between the team members in the team. The rest of the company operates under the trust no one rule, even though it contradicts their stated culture. How would you suggest Laura approach building trust with her team? Consider the following. So think about rules for treatment of others. So, things like relaunching the code of behaviours or code of conduct, if there's anything like that. If you want to put on a bit of a TCCS type of spin on it, might be about relaunching the RED program or something like that. Also think about how she could use company policies and procedures on ethical and business standards. So no doubt there's already policies and procedures around behaviours, consistent behaviours, about ethical practice and so forth. Should she relaunch those? Should she do some training sessions? Should she, just say, using the opportunity of being new, is say, hey, I want to get my head around these too. I think it'd be a great opportunity for the team to also do some work together so I can understand what you guys think on it. What processes should she implement? And processes can include things like regular team meetings, suggestion boards, whiteboards, continuous improvement type stuff, and we'll talk more about continuous improvement later in the program. Those type of processes could be really helpful in terms of getting people to start to raise issues. And then for Laura, remember, this is all about Laura starting to build a history. She wants her team to come up with some challenges for her so that she can respond, she can act in a professional way that is consistent with their expectations. And the more she does that, the more that they have that history of her behavior, the more that they can trust her. As a manager, as a new member in the team, Laura, it would be really unrealistic for her to say, "Okay, I'm new here, so trust me." She needs to set a history of example that people can then start to build trust upon. So how would she set standards for performance? Things like going back to codes of conduct, performance management systems. It's not only about trust between Laura and herself, it's also trust between the team members. If we think about competence, and you can reflect back on your own experience, if you've got someone within your team who isn't performing up to standard, people in positions of responsibility need to respond to that, or else it undermines the trust of the whole team. This idea of double standards or different rules, why should I bother if they're not going to hold Tony accountable for it and so forth. So hopefully that should make some sense for you. Let's see if I can get back to the presentation. So that's scenario activity 7. So let's talk about networking. Networking as a part of this unit is really it's a little bit unusual actually, because networking has traditionally been a management function. So normally at in a management role, one of the things that you would be expected to do is network. Um, I talked about at the start of this lecture. I talked about internal and external sources of information. So internal sources of information, things like policies and procedures, colleagues, they're usually examples of internal relationships. But often, if we talk about external um, sources of information, one of the key external sources of information that managers use are networks. So as a manager, you're trying to get an idea of, what's this COVID-19? What's that mean? What's going on? I might jump on the phone and have a chat to someone I know who works. In your case, it might be another depot, another site, or it might be, talk to someone in another state who's in a similar kind of role and context. What are you guys doing about this? What are they saying there? What's happening? Because that's going to help you to make your decisions as well, or just be informed and be prepared and so forth. So networking is traditionally seen as a management responsibility. This particular unit is part of the frontline management unit at a level 3, so hence why it's in there. In the old days, we used to say networking was, it's not about what you know, it's who you know, and it was often, you get promoted if you play golf with the right people, or you go drinking, or whatever the case is, and your buddy, they'll tap you on the shoulder, and you tend to be get all the perks that come with that. A more contemporary view of it, so something that's a little bit more the way that we see it now in definitely the last 10 years, is that networking isn't about who you know, but it's about what you know. So the idea is that, and I talked about this a little bit through the program, but the idea is that the better decisions that you make, the better you're going to perform. So if my job is, say I've got a senior role within a team, and people come to me at times to look for direction and leadership upon things, and I make good decisions that help us to become more efficient and effective, then that looks favorable upon me, and that looks favorable upon the team. So we all benefit from that. So if I have good source of networks, like that example I gave before, that is another source of information for me, which helps me to make better decisions. So it's part of my arsenal of information sources. So if there's something within the organization that I can't get information for, so something new, and COVID-19 is a great example of this, where there's no policies and procedures for this stuff, and I'm not really sure what I need to do, or how I'm going to prepare for this, and the information from the organization's a little bit slow for in coming through, and I've got good strong networks in a sense that I know people in other depots or in other sites, or might be in other states in similar situations. I might pick up the phone or send an email and try and find out what's happening over there, and using those sources of information, it might help me to be better prepared for when things hit our team. It might help me to make better decisions, and all these things build up towards helping me perform better, me as an individual, and as I said before, help our team to perform better. So networks become critical for that. Networking is one of those things that some people find really intuitive. So some people build networks really naturally. So they're not it's not something that they have to work on, but something that they just enjoy as part of their everyday type of behaviors. And networking is really just about building relationships. So some people are really strong social butterflies, so they build really strong relationships. I worked with a guy a while ago, back when I was in industry, who spent the majority of his day just on the phone talking to people, just building networks. And it wasn't something that he did on purpose. It was just his nature, and he did it because he loved talking to people. He loved being connected with others. And I've worked with other people who that's the furthest from what they do. The- And the really good networkers are the guys, and when I say guys again, non-gender specific, the people who really push information out. So they don't they're not on the phone or an email asking, just farming information of everybody. They're always pushing it out so it naturally comes back to them. So they work on this reciprocal type of arrangement where there's an imbalance, and you're always giving people out good information so that others feel that they have to um, uh, help you back out, just to sort of balance it out a bit. So you've given me some really great info. Yeah, hey Tony, have you heard about what's happening with this uh, COVID-19? They're talking about doing this type of stuff, so you might want to order some of this stuff um, before it becomes really scarce to grab. So I go, oh, okay, thanks, mate. That's good. I go do an order and I get my stuff, and then all of a sudden there's a shortage, and I'm like, oh, thank goodness that I got the heads up from that person. And then I feel like I owe you one. So the next time that something comes across my desk that I think is going to be really helpful for you, I won't hesitate in pushing it your way because I feel that I owe you one. So the people who are really good networkers, they're always pushing out so that people always feel that that they owe them something. And networks can't be built. You can't use people. People always they get a sense of when you're trying to use them. So, and what I mean by that, so you just can't pick up the phone and go, "Hey Tony, I need a favor." Because I'll go, "What the hell? I haven't heard from you in so long. I don't even know who you are." And here you are out of the blue, asking me for a favor. Networks are built over time. So, especially when you talk about senior management are often strategically building networks. So they're thinking about what's what where do they want to be connected in a couple of years' time, and then they start to build those relationships now, so that when that time comes, they're connected. So often we're thinking about building long term. Really, at this level, though, we're just thinking about building strong relationships that can give us access to information outside of our organization as another avenue of being able to provide information that can be helpful. And the critical part to that is making sure that that not only that we're connected. So as you can see from this diagram, if I talk about this person in the middle here that the mouse is hovering over, networks isn't just about being connected to this person here. It's also about having access to this person. So good networkers will go, hey dude, have you can you help me out with this? And this person will go, oh yeah, I owe you one, so I'll get you connected to this person, and then through me I can give you access to some information that can be really helpful. So often networkers are looking, and they're called networking holes or loops that you can get through. So we're often thinking about networking in that strategic context. All right, let's look at a couple of activities. I think I've spoken enough about networking. How can professional networks be built? So think about, I've given you a heap of examples of outside. So things like professional bodies and industries. So, if you're a senior manager, you say you're a senior engineer, you're probably connected to a heap of engineering type of bodies. So as a consultant, I subscribe to a number of different consultancy groups. As a trainer, I also subscribe to a number of different trainer groups, and there's always professional development activities going on where you can you don't even have to go there, you can do it virtually these days, things like webinars and so forth. So that's at a senior management, but even at an operational level, if we take it more inside, we can build professional networks simply by going to organizational events. So looking for opportunities where you can connect with other people in other depots, for example. Things like training sessions like we're doing right now, and you think about the networks that you've built up throughout the workshop program, where you've met people from other sites and got to know them at different levels. So think about that sort of stuff when you're thinking about networks, both external and the internal networks that you can build. How can networks help to improve your effectiveness as a team member? And I talked quite a bit about just about providing information, helping you make better decisions, helping you have access to information that might be missing. So you think about one of the examples I haven't used are suppliers. Some of you guys that have really strong connections with your suppliers, and it might be suppliers of products or services or equipment. So I know in past groups, that we've talked about things like suppliers for the arborists, for example, with different types of equipment when they come out, new equipment and so forth. Those connections can be really helpful as well. So that's with helping you improve your effectiveness. And how can I help the organization? How can networks help improve the effectiveness of the organization? If you're making better decisions, quite simply, the organization's making better decisions too. That's 8.3. Sorry, I just paused there because activity 8.3 is not on the slide, but it's in your workbook. So just keep an eye out for that. And there's a heap of white space there for the response, but you only need to just pop a couple of bullet points in terms of how can you help improve the effectiveness of the organization. It's really about providing information for the organization that may not currently exist, and also giving an external perspective. Because the other thing too that I didn't mention is that if you only ever get your information from internal sources, you will only ever replicate the same thing, right? So to give you an example of that is if the training is ever if training within your team is only ever done by coaching, people will always learn the same shortcuts and habits and potentially mistakes that have always occurred. It's not until you go outside, it's not until you either get say a supplier to do some training, or a trainer like myself to do some training, or someone from an industry body to do some training, that you start to then get external information and you can add new information. Oh, you're not actually doing this step there. Everyone else is doing this step because it's a new requirement. Aren't you aware of that? No, we never saw that. Oh, well, it's been out for about 6 months. You guys should be doing that. Oh, okay, we better start doing that. And that's the beauty of that. You've got to have a good balance between the internal sources of information and the external, so that you're not just, it's like the car air conditioner system. You're not just recycling the same air. Sometimes you need to get some fresh air in. Activity 9. So when you look in your workbook, and I'll just with my awesome IT skills get it back up. When you have a look at activity 9, you'll see that there's a whole activity there about networking within the group. So we've done heaps. I mean, I would still, if we were doing this in the workshop, would still be doing this, but because we're not physically in the workshop, I'm going to just use the proxy of all the networking that we've done. So the purpose of this activity was for you to demonstrate that you can actually build networks. What I'm going to do instead is to say that all the activities where you've worked in groups, things like flip chart activities and so forth, I'm going to take that all in as a demonstration of this activity. So with that one there, just leave activity 8 blank, please. Sorry, activity 9, I should say. All right, let's go back to the slide. So the last bit of this unit is around conflict resolution, and of course we did conflict last session. We've done quite a bit around that, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Just to sort of recap on some of the key points, which is, conflict is really important part of any effective team. We've got to be able to challenge ideas, otherwise we just everyone gets all passive, and we never stretch each other. So we need to continually look to challenge each other, but do it in a way that's respectful and considerate. So always thinking about how we're providing feedback, how it can be constructive and not destructive. So that often means things like being able to identify good points or ideas, being able to provide constructive, that is, build on that constructive feedback, and then being able to show our commitment to where we're going. So things like coaching and mentoring are really great ways in which we can do that. Um, so making sure that we assist colleagues, in ways such as making suggestions and offering advice and so forth to help them to to um, to get up to the levels that are required. And just on that last point, I suppose, just to sort of stress that last point, in some cases where people are having, especially when we're supporting colleagues, we're helping people through difficulty, and that might be difficulty in performance and so forth, making sure that we're always aware that there are employee assistance programs, EAPs out there that play a really important part of the support mechanism an organisation offers. So activity 10, what are some of the possible signs that your colleagues are having difficulties? So we've already talked about some of these, but just recap on this in your answers. Some of the possible signs that your colleagues are having difficulties, and it might be things such as underperformance, slowness, asking a lot of questions, not lack of confidence in decision making. Those type of signals often give you the indicator that someone is not exactly comfortable with what's happening. How can you assist colleagues experiencing difficulty? Well, we can always assist our colleagues through things such as coaching and mentoring that we talked about, buddying up, sharing information that I've been talking about throughout this unit, and that information might be providing advice, as we just mentioned, or it can be things such as pointing them in the right direction for policies and procedures. Which then leads on to the third one. What are some of the important policies, procedures, legal requirements to adhere to when assisting colleagues having difficulties? And this is really where I'm thinking about stuff such as the anti-discrimination stuff. So go back to some of that anti-discrimination. We talk about sex, we talk about race discrimination, equal opportunity. All those type of legislative tools and implements are there to protect people from being discriminated in the workplace. This is the collaboration framework we talked about last session. The 5 approaches to dealing with conflict. The avoidance. If I get this mouse going, the avoidance, which is where your needs and wants and my needs and wants aren't met. The competing, where you get what you want, but I don't get what I want. The accommodating, which is where the way this is going, I've sort of going the other way around. The accommodating, where you get what you want, but I don't get what I want. Whereas the competing is where I get what I want, you don't get what you want. I was looking at the 2 axes the wrong way. And compromise, where we sort of meet that middle ground. Collaboration, which we talked about extensively, is this idea of me getting what I want and you getting what you want, or vice versa, whichever one. We both get to this collaborative outcome. I think those axes mess me up a little bit. This one's you and this one's me, right? So collaboration is where we both get it. I'm not going to go through this because we went through all of this last session, but I do want to just park a little bit here on constructive feedback. Again, we talked about constructive feedback a few sessions ago, but it's pretty important, so I just want to just anchor a few comments in this. Constructive feedback is about giving feedback not that is critical, but that helps that person to improve. And there's a difference between that, because critical feedback is where I say, Tony, you're useless. Constructive feedback is where I say, this was really good, but I think we can do this bit better, and this is how I think we can do it. So making sure that I'm actually offering some constructive support, rather than just sort of being critical and then run off. So when we're providing constructive feedback, making sure that we do it in private, making sure that we focus on behaviors, not on personality. That this is what we can do to do it better, not you're just useless or you're hopeless or you're no good with figures, Tony, which is a personal attack. Be specific, provide factual information. If I can't give you facts, then maybe I should rethink about giving you feedback. So if I want to give you feedback about the fact that you don't finish the tasks that you do, you always leave them half done, and I can't give you a specific example of when you've done that, then maybe I should hold off on giving that feedback until I do. when I can provide some factual information, then I can come up to you and say, hey, I want to talk to you about just getting these jobs done. Are you aware that this particular job only got completed up to this point, and there were still 2 more steps to go? I was wondering, were you aware of that? Yeah, you were. Okay, you didn't know that there were 2 hours. Can I help? Can I give you some feedback in terms of what are the additional steps? And then we can just work from there. If I can't be factual like that, then I'm just really just having a go at you, which isn't helping anybody. It's not helping you, and it definitely won't help our relationship. Be empathic in terms of putting yourself in their shoes, and always work towards that win-win outcome that we talked about. And it's always good to ask if they would like some help. So would you like me to help? And would you like us to work together on this? Then going on some other stuff we talked about last session, making sure that we plan out the who, what, and when, making sure that we have those reviews and follow-up mechanisms in place. Feedback should never be used as a punishment, and no doubt we've all got experience of this where we've had negative feedback because it makes the person feel better, not because it's helpful for us, but because that the other person just is so frustrated they just want to have a rant at us. And that's an example of feedback as punishment, where you just say to someone, oh, I just want to vent on you because you're frustrating the hell out of me, and that's going to make me feel better. It will make you feel better, but it's not very constructive, and it's not going to help in terms of the team effectiveness. So always think about, how can I make this actually valuable to you and to me, and try and leave the person motivated. And that's that feedback sandwich or hamburger, that looks delicious, that we've talked about in the past. Let's have a look here. So activity 11. I might just I'll bring up the workbook. All right. Activity 11. What could you do to support your colleagues in the following situation? A colleague is complaining that they're trying to handle 3 queries at once, and that is putting them under immense pressure. How would you handle that? Your colleague seems upset. You ask them if everything is okay, and they tell you that they're having trouble entering information into the database. After probing, you find out that they're not confident using the system. You don't have any trouble operating the system, and you feel confident that you're competent at using it. That's a really great opportunity for coaching or budding. Your colleague, and scenario number 3, your colleague is working as acting team leader in your regular team leader's absence. They seem to be struggling with handling their regular tasks as well as additional responsibilities. You're familiar with performing some of their regular tasks, so how could you support them in that? So that's activity 11. I won't go too much into that because I think that's a bit of a self-reflection one. You guys should be able to work through that pretty well. And of course, there's also our own poor performance, dealing with our own poor performance, identifying the level of performance that is required, making sure that we're constantly evaluating our own performance, having a look at what feedback or statistics, data can we get that will help us to determine exactly what the gaps are, looking at what are those causes of those gaps. So if there's a gap between what I'm supposed to be doing and what I'm doing, what's causing that? What can I do to develop that? Is it a competency issue? Do I need training? Is it a support issue? Do I need to know? Do I need better tools? Do I need to know what the end goal looks like? Do I need to, do I need to have someone there that I can ask questions? All these type of support type questions. And then finally, what's my effort like? And that might be, how important do I think this task is? How excited do I get about it? And you think about all those elements in terms of identifying the gap and the causes, and then what can I do to fix it? So if it's a competency issue, where can I get that training? If it's a support issue, where can I get those resources? If it's a effort issue, how can I discover the importance of this task? Gather data to determine new performance outcomes and review performance against the performance expectations, that idea of constantly reviewing. And then we're up to activity 12. So activity 12. Your role makes decisions that impact in the whole team. You're responsible for coordinating and allocating the fleet of various vehicles for the team. Jill, one of your colleagues, has just told you that Jack, another colleague, has been criticizing you and your decisions. Jill tells you that they think Jack is trying to turn other staff against you. Ooh. Number 1, outline your approach for dealing with this situation. What steps will you take to deal with the conflict constructively? So how will you approach Jack? Well, think about things such as, what I just talked about before, getting your facts, getting specifics, doing it in private, all those type of things. And 2, your performance has come into question. How can you identify if there is a gap in your performance and how you can go about resolving any performance gaps? And then that just takes us back to our previous slide. Again, find out what your performance targets are. Find out, get the data on what your performance has been. Identify if there are a gap. If there is a gap, break it down to whether it's a competency or a resource or support issue, or whether it's an effort issue, and then put together a plan on how you can build that. And that plan can be in consultation with your colleagues, can be in consultation with your manager, HR, all the applicable, all relevant people. And that takes us through to the last project. So the project, so this one was going to be, for this particular one, there's and I'm not going to get you to do it because we've covered off. I can use one of the other ones, and this is really a team, because it's a team work unit. It was really a team one, but you can have a read through it. I'm not going to read through it, but the project is, there's a NASA put out a tool where they talk about if you're on a spaceship and you crash on one side of the moon and you've got to get to another part, and you just have all these things that are left over, you've got to make a decision of which ones you take, because you can only take X amount. So there's a whole list there, and you can go through and rank them. And then NASA have got a ranking on what they reckon, and then reasons for that. The whole, if we were doing the workshop, I would break you up into teams. I'd get you to do it, and it's all about coming up with a collaborative and consultative approach where you all agree on it. And then at the end I just give you the NASA sheet, and we compare them just for giggles. If you want to do that, you can still do that, and then you can just go to the NASA site to have a look at what theirs are. If you want to compare it, just out of interest, because it is a pretty good fun activity, and I'm disappointed we won't be able to do it, but it's no good doing it on your own. It's fun when you're doing it with a group of people, in my opinion, anyway. So that pretty much just wraps up this unit. So that is Unit 10. So that's pretty much Unit 10, and this is the 4 areas: seek, receive, communicate information, ideas, encourage trust and confidence, identify, use networks and relationships, contribute to positive outcomes. So I just want to quickly, before we wrap up, just talk about what you can do for me. So the ways that you can submit this: you can just complete the workbook as you would normally. If we were in the workshop, watch this video. You're watching it on YouTube. Hopefully hasn't put you to sleep. If it has, great. I might be able to find a new job as someone to help with people who suffer from insomnia. Hopefully it hasn't put you to sleep. And as you're working through it, you've worked through the activities as I've talked through it. And if you've handwritten in your activities, all you need to do now is you've got 2 options. You can pop it in an envelope, and you can send it to, and I should type this up actually. Let me just, whilst you do this, I wonder if I can. Does this update it? Oh yeah, you can send it through to, look at me. If you wanted to do the traditional snail mail, you can send it through to this address. So you can send it through to the PO box in Belco, and then what happens is that the office or the people who are still working remotely, they pick it up, they register it that you've sent it, and then they send it through to me. I'm actually up at Queensland at the moment, so then they'll send it up to me, and if it gets lost, at least we've registered and we take responsibility for that. So that's one way that you can submit it. You can submit it through the PO box, or alternatively, if you've got access to a scanner, you can scan it and you can just send it directly to me at my email, tony@macmillan.net.au. Most of you guys still have my business card, but that's it. If you just want to scan it and email it directly through to me. And as I said before, if you haven't just written it out, and let's say you're typing it, you can just type all the answers directly onto a Word document, as long as they're headed up saying, activity 1.1, activity 1.2, and then you can just send that through to me. I don't really care in how I get it, as long as I can see where you've put answers together and I can show that you've done the activity. And this is my mobile number. If you have any questions or queries, you can give me a call. Hopefully that's good. If I haven't made anything clear, just pop me an email or give me a call and I'll clarify it. I will endeavour to. I know some of you guys would be really keen to smash this out whilst you're probably twiddling your thumbs. So I'll try and smash through these videos as quickly as possible, so that you can have access to them as quickly as possible, and then you can complete it as quickly as possible, and we can get you the certificate, and you can surpass the soft barrier as quickly as possible. But if there's anything I can do to improve it, so if my diction or my articulation is really poor, or I'm mumbled, or my jokes are really bad and they're making you cry, let me know, and I'll make adjustments as we go through. Okay, other than that, that's about all I have to say about that. Please keep safe and keep well, and hopefully I'll get to talk to you soon. Okay, thanks folks. Cheers.